welcome to our Fireside chat. Kathy Williams-Devries and I are following on from last YouTube video where I touched on some things that went rather deep to my murky subconscious, and I'm still working on it and healing. It's like layers of the onion.
Yes.
You get one layer and you think, oh, got it sorted. And then suddenly you discover there's other layers and more and more and more.
Yes. Also, if you're a fan of the old black and white movies, there's a particular movie called The Seventh Veil, starring James Mason and Herbert Lom. I mean, we're talking 40s.
Yes.
Where there was this pianist who it was in therapy because she thought she couldn't play the piano anymore. Because what happened was the character of James Mason was her ward, and she wanted to get married, and of course he was in love with her. And he rapped her over the knuckles while she was playing, and she believed she couldn't play anymore. So Herbert Lom comes in as the psychiatrist, and the veils, of course, refer to the dance of the veils,
Yes.
where each veil comes off. So that's another reference as well. So the onion or the seventh veil.
Veils are possibly nicer than onions.
Yes.
But where were we? When we were talking last video, I touched on some things which go really close to the bone. I put out 2 books in my memoir stroke family history, and by the way, just this week I discovered that Midnight Sun to Southern Cross won the 2019 Queensland Family History Book Award. So I had a very sleepless night, being very excited to have validation. But in this book, I went very close to the bone. This one was rather fun. It's about the Black Sheep brother who fled Finland in 1899 from the Russian regime oppression. And I always said, why did the Russians look for him in Suez? Not Suez, Suez.
Where the canal is, yes.
And he gave them the slip, but he was pretty paranoid even in Mullumbimby, Byron Bay area, out there looking out over the lighthouse. So this book takes us to about 1920, and his pinnacle as a pen fighter, he described himself. This book picks up about then, but it starts with me, young Ruth, travelling down from Western Queensland, where we lived on sheep properties and were brought up on hillbilly music. Or I've been chasing shillers for or the pub with no beer.
Yes.
And if you take a clarinet out there, and especially when I was young, you get this, oh, what's that, you pump it? Oh. Or you would get, is that the tune the cow died on? Or, what do you do all day? Haven't you learned it all yet? And I felt I was a cuckoo in the nest and got culture shock when I came down to Brisbane to study, where I could learn the clarinet because you wouldn't get anything out there in those days. And it was quite a little bit tricky. I wrote a fair bit about it in this book, Sounds and Souls, about my experiences of if I had to teach young Ruth with all the issues she had, having played piano on a piano that was a piano, and silverfish and mice gnawing inside, and you play a note and it goes doing. I had no oral capacity whatsoever. I therefore didn't stick with piano, and I therefore had very little harmonic capacity. So how would I teach young Ruth with decades of experience now? It's quite an interesting question. That's a big long segue into the fact that last video I touched on something where a word lobbed at me was like a blow to my solar plexus. And I lent the book to Kathy so she'd get it, but she doesn't read hard copies. She wanted it online. It is online, places like Booktopia, Amazon, etc., etc. You can download an ebook. But what I thought I might do is talk about this, because there I was poor little shy, yes I was shy, I promise, very shy, culture shocked Ruth, who was finally encouraged by John Currell. Did you go through the youth orchestra?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, amazing Queensland Youth Orchestra, a brilliant development for so many thousands of musicians. And John was very visionary, and he it was who, when I was going in for the top pinnacle competition, nowadays called the Young Performer of the Year, in those days it had another clunky title, and he was a tutor at university where I was playing it in a master class. In those days you could smoke in a class, but you couldn't now. So I play my Weber, and yeah, I can play it. And John sits there and says, "What do you want to play Weber for?" Because I know it. "Why don't you play Copeland?" Because I don't know it. And top altissimo notes and tricky rhythms are not my forte. "Why don't you play Copeland?" Why not? Those two words you will have heard him speak. I dedicated Sounds and Souls to John Currell and to my own clarinet teacher, David Shepherd. Anyway, because it's 3 weeks away, the next round, why not? Well, I got the music and I went and really, really worked hard at it. Reached an amazing pinnacle of actually, when I performed it with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra, it was not competition. I had won that Queensland section. They didn't send me down to the finals, which I'm a bit peeved about. But anyway.
Actually, while we're on the Copeland concerto, it's actually a concerto very dear to my heart because it's the first concerto I played with orchestra in 1998 with the Queensland Conservatorium Orchestra. And then in 1999 I also entered the Young Performer Performers Awards. And I'll never forget, in the second round, I played the Copeland.
Yes.
And I'll never forget the look of absolute astonishment on Alan Smith's face, and I actually brought it up with him earlier this year when I was playing with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra, and he remembered, and I explained his facial expression, and he says, "Well, actually, it was a very, very good reaction from him." But so I actually played the Copeland Concerto with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra as well.
Snap.
And I didn't get into the final. I just made the instrumental final. But in that particular year, they actually had to split the instrumental finals into two parts because there were 8 finalists in that, and the percussionist. So the first final was in Queensland, and the second final was in Perth.
Yes.
And I got the call at about, I'd say sort of midnight, and I happened to be sitting on the loo at the time, and I heard that Claire Edwards, the very esteemed percussionist, she won through to the final, and then I believe she won the final.
Wow.
So, but you know,
isn't that exciting?
The Copeland is very, very dear to my heart, especially because when I went on work experience with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra when I was 17 at high school, one of the pieces that the QSO played that week was Appalachian Spring. So I've always felt an affinity for Copeland, and in fact, I think Michael Morgan said that he thought that the piece was almost sort of written for me. The way I completely sort of immersed myself in it, and in the first section of the Copeland, the slow section, has so many parallels to the beginning of Appalachian Spring.
Yes.
You know, it's like I'm a very sort of visual person, and I could see, you know, the Appalachian Mountains and the snow while I was playing.
Yeah.
So, but we digress, because where we got to at the end of the last video was that you had played the Copland Concerto and someone said something to you, and this is what we're going to learn right now.
I might read a smidgen about it.
Because I don't think anyone's talked about.
No.
Anyone talks about this on YouTube. I mean, we have millions of tutorial videos, but videos on you know what we say can impact.
Absolutely.
And not just in music, of course, but we're speaking from a musical perspective.
Yes, but also what we are as people is what we can be as musicians, and the two are inseparable.
Well, actually, it took me many years, but actually the musician and the person, for me, are completely separate.
Interesting.
It took a lot of growing.
Yes.
But you know, if I have a bad day as a musician, it doesn't affect me as a person, because it's not a reflection of who I am.
Wow, that's mature. Most of us would take it very personally.
Well, I used to, but I'm very interested. I'm very interested to hear your story.
All right. So, oh my goodness, it was 2 weeks away. So John said, "Why not?" John Kuro. Because the next round of performance is 2 weeks away, and I have not learned, let alone played, the Copland. There's nothing to lose. You can fall back on Weber. Just do it. Those 3 words are another very significant 3 words. How I practice. Never have I worked so. I climb a technical Mount Everest, as you would know. Slay dragons of my weaknesses. My rhythmic vagaries are drilled into precision. Altissimo register runs conquered. Day and night I live, work, sleep, and finally surmount the Copland Concerto. My performance with the Queensland Symphony is already a triumph. There is no apprehension about winning. I did so already. This is my moment, charged with electricity. I shine ecstatic. The glorious moment will never be repeated. My feet barely touch the ground as I walk through the City Hall foyer with my parents. I don't know if I should reveal it was my father, but I've got this far. You could edit that out maybe, but it was. Until my father chops my future off at its ankles. Remember, he's from the bush. Those internationally, the bush means way back, outback country. Why would people pay money to come and hear that? He asks. Those words cast me into an abyss. Dad's unthinking remark slams at my solar plexus. The emotional shock, and it is shock, stays with me. I have no heart for future competitions. The next year I'll make a lukewarm entry for the same competition, but a raging temperature justifies my withdrawal. Music loses its joy, its play becomes work. I'll skip a little bit. Decades later, my chiropractor will notice my tight rib cage and shallow breathing. And I remember have been teaching young students and older students to breathe for decades. I know all about ribs and diaphragms and intercostal muscles. I told Kathy. A professional musician and teacher should know how to breathe. I went to a lot of singing teachers because woodwind teachers didn't tend
I
to
went
get
to
us
many singing master classes when I was at the Royal
Yes.
College of Music.
Absolutely. But they still didn't quite click. Through kinesiology treatment, and I mentioned that in another of my books, this one, we release that spasm of breath holding that has become a habit since this time. And just today I was working with a Feldenkrais practitioner to release the pelvic and psoas muscles. Well, pelvis is a bone, a major bone, but psoas muscles and so on. that performance of Copland Concerto is my musical pinnacle. Like Carl Johan, I peak early and never match it again.
That's an interesting story, because I had an experience in a masterclass, because when I was younger, I suffered a lot of depression and anxiety, and what I didn't find out until I was 36 was that what was wrong was not bipolar or borderline personality disorder. Back then, 7 years ago, it was called Asperger's, although they don't tend to use that now. They just tend to say autism spectrum disorder type 1, because there's Asperger's comes from the particular fellow who isolated with, who was a Nazi. Yeah. So we don't want being on the autism spectrum to be associated with Nazism. But one thing, and I think this is an interesting topic to talk about in terms of what we say to students, because a lot of students these days are on the autism spectrum. And if they're not on the autism spectrum, they're sort of ADHD or OCD. There's a number of, and I mean, the kids can be suffering from anxiety and depression even from a very young age. I know, yes. I know I did. Yes. And especially girls tend to be diagnosed with ASD type 1 a lot later than boys, really? Because girls learn to hide it better. Yeah. And I hid it until I was...
We can wear masks, we can act, we can...
Yes, well, it's sort of, it's communication, it's ease at being with people, but one thing about girls with ASD type 1 Asperger's is that they take any criticism very, very personally. Yes. And I've had some very terrible things thrown at me in master classes, to the point where I've actually melted down, and if that's a typical autistic thing, is the meltdown. Because inspired by seeing you playing, I think, the Mozart Clarinet Quintet, and also Pauline, and also being a gymnast, I liked to move to the music. Although, sort of given my mental state, I think I tried to move way too much, and that was pointed out over and over. But I think the worst comment, though it was qualified about 10 seconds later, was if you were playing in a concert, I wouldn't pay to see you play. Yes.
That is the same
But
thing.
what they meant was, if I came to see you in concert, I would close my eyes so that I'm not distracted for your movement. But what was initially said was I wouldn't pay to see you play.
And that is incredibly the same.
Isn't
that so spooky?
Yes.
But interestingly, all my slow movements have, well, my Mozart slow movement and quintet maybe, have written at the top of the page, stand still, usually by my husband.
Although you'd be sitting technically for a quintet.
Yeah, true. But I think I feel faster movements, I'll just be myself. But on the other hand, I caution students, I like to move myself. I do naturally move, but if it's excessive, I'm open to being told, for example.
Yes. Well, I remember I had a master class at the Royal College of Music, and it might have actually been with Michael Collins. And he was saying, oh, can't you imagine that the clarinet's in cement or something? And that, of course, tensed up the rest of my body, which, because someone said the only thing worse than you moving a lot is the audience being aware that you're actually trying to stop moving, and, of course, the tension. Now, what's interesting, after many, many years of therapy, from psychiatrists and with psychologists, and also being put on antidepressant medication, is that my mindset's totally changed, so that I no longer have to prove anything. I felt when I was younger I had to prove something every time I got up. But after many, many years, and I've reached a stage now when I'm very much at peace with myself. I gave myself a very, very hard time for many, many years, because I realised as early as 2002, when I auditioned for the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, that I realised that even if I did make the grade playing-wise, mentally I never would have been able to stand up to it. But I never forgave myself for not being a orchestral clarinetist. And it was only through my latest psychiatrist, who was the one that identified me as Asperger's. She said, think of it, if you compare yourself to her. Imagine that instead of being a psychiatrist, she wanted to be sort of an osteo or something in medicine that required a lot of heavy lifting.
Yes.
Well, of course, slight young woman, no way that she could, and that was okay. She was okay with that because she couldn't do it. And that made me kind of realise, well, yeah, given the set of cards I've been dealt with, the depression, the anxiety, the Asperger's, the obsessive compulsion disorder, my general dislike with being among a group of people. So you can imagine what I'd be like if I had to sit in an orchestra,
and the
hour after hour, day after day. I mean, yes, I did it recently with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra, but I was playing recorder, and everybody thought we were fantastic, even if we knew we weren't. But it's not a. So I realised that with the set of cards I've been dealt, that there is no way I could be an orchestral clarinetist. It doesn't matter how good this is, and so I forgave myself.
Yes. There is a wonderful phrase which I picked up in my various ways of keeping intact against my set of cards in my card game. The phrase, I'm doing my best as a whatever, musician, person, whatever, and past, present and future, and I totally and utterly love and appreciate and respect myself. And a lot of us from my generation find that very hard because we didn't have our drawings put up on the fridge and, oh, that's lovely, dear. Back in the day, it was like, don't praise them too much or they'll get a swollen head, which sounded sort of akin to leprosy. And so we just got anything but praise. And in fact, you mentioned something. I guess I spent most of my life being a try-hard because I battled.
Oh yeah, try. Oh well, it's not just adults. It's your fellow students. It's your classmates. I mean, I got terribly. No, my brother was great. I was the one that bullied him.
I think it must have been my sibling that came up with the nickname Useless. Ruth equals ruthless equals useless.
Yes.
Go figure. Now, if you battle that, it took many layers of my onion and many different paths.
Many veils.
In this one, I talked about applied kinesiology and emotional freedom technique, things like that. And sure,
Oh, see, Australia,
Castles.
Australia, of course, is notorious for the tall poppy syndrome.
Unfortunately, yes.
So, I mean, I remember being terribly teased at school.